This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. All views and opinions expressed are the views and opinions of the individuals and sponsors presenting them, and not the LTB network. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to yet another exciting edition of SovereignBTC, your guide to the practical side of everyday Bitcoin use. This is the 11th episode, and it was recorded entirely at the Texas Libertarian Party Convention here in Temple, Texas. I was invited to participate in a panel called Banks, Bailouts, and Bitcoin. It was really exciting. I recorded the whole thing. We're going to be bringing that to you towards the end of the program. Of course, Bitcoin is popping up everywhere. I guess it's, two peas in a peaceful pod to be here at the Libertarian Party. And there were several different people I chatted with about Bitcoin. I had the opportunity to chat with Ben Swann. He's with the Truth in Media Project. You can check him out at benswann.com. He's a big Liberty guy, and he's also a proponent of Bitcoin. We chatted about them accepting Bitcoin for donations and what he thinks about Bitcoin as a true demonstration of free market capitalism. We also caught up with Matthew Whittington. He's working on a great project here in the state of Texas. He's going to start a Bitcoin exchange that also accepts and exchanges Litecoin and Dogecoin, Peercoin, Namecoin, and a couple others. So that was pretty exciting that he's including all the altcoins in the exchange. It's pretty rare. We chat with him as well. We caught up with Harlon Dietrich. He's the owner of Brave New Books, bravenewbookstore.com. It's the first brick and mortar in the entire state of Texas to accept Bitcoin. They sell paper wallets, cold storage, all sorts of cool stuff as well. That's bravenewbookstore.com. We chat with him about their business, accepting Bitcoin, merchant integration, some of the problems they've had, and talk about the value of cold storage and paper wallets and securing your Bitcoin. And then again, I bring you the panel that we took part in. It was called Bitcoin, Banks, and Bailouts. Ben Swann was the moderator. Myself participated, along with Michael Cargill of Central Texas Gunworks, the first gun store in the country to accept Bitcoin. He was on the panel as well, along with Dr. Lucas Rentschler. He's a professor of economics from a university in Guatemala, and he had a lot of interesting things to say on the topic of Bitcoin as well. So without further ado, folks, we're going to move on to the program. We're going to start with the conversation I had with Ben Swann about Bitcoin. Here you go. I hope you enjoy. We're here with Ben Swann of the Truth in Media Project. You can find his work at benswann.com. He's a liberty activist, a journalist, doing a lot of great work. Many people are familiar with him. Did a lot of work pushing the message of Ron Paul out when Ron Paul was getting censored. He was in the mainstream media, local Fox affiliate, and he pushed the message of liberty out there, and looks like the execs found that it was popular. For some time, it worked for him.
It was great.
But now he's doing his own thing, independent journalism, and he's really making some waves, and he's also a big fan of Bitcoin, so we're going to chat with him about Bitcoin as it relates to liberty and the work that he's doing. Ben, thanks for joining us.
John, thanks for having me.
So I guess we'll just start by asking, how do you think Bitcoin fits into the broader push to create a free society?
Well, I think Bitcoin is crucial to that because obviously in any free society is free exchange, right? Without coercion. We don't have free exchange, monetary exchange, or even exchange within the market at all. The regulatory climate is so high. What Bitcoin does is it introduces an idea that our fiat currency is truly a fiat currency. So why not be able to introduce other forms of currency and give people choice in the market? Now, that's actually not an original concept, as you know. It's a very old concept, but it hasn't been a true concept really for at least 100 years in this country. So there's no real generation of American alive today who understands that idea. It's a very foreign concept to them. Bitcoin is reintroducing that idea.
Right on. Now, you gave a talk at the Texas Bitcoin Conference about how Bitcoin represents the truest incarnation of capitalism that we've experienced yet. Can you talk about that idea and start by defining, how do you see capitalism? What is capitalism, and how does Bitcoin fit into that?
Sure. Well, let's start by saying this, that across the world, people talk about capitalism and capitalists. And I think far too often they misrepresent capitalism because they don't know what it is. There is no true example of capitalism in the world except for Bitcoin, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because every form of currency, every form of trade, production, government is involved in all of it. Cronies are involved in all of it. And so Bitcoin, when it comes along, gives the opportunity, number one, it's fully voluntary. It gives people the opportunity to be able to be a part of an exchange or not a part of it. They're allowed to buy into it, or whether they choose to or not. But it also carries the risks of a free market, right? Sometimes when we get into these, kind of libertarian, conservative circles, and people talk about free market, they use the term free market.
Yeah.
They misuse it, right? Because it's the greatest thing in the world. It's all sunshine and lollipops, and it's not. There's bad players in free markets. There are bad players in the capitalist system who hurt people. There are also people in every other system who hurt people. Yeah. In the government system that's regulated by government hurts people. Yeah. So it's not an issue of Bitcoin and capitalism sets us free from bad players. What it does is it allows for the opportunity for good players and the individual to make choices for themselves and to be able to have free exchange without coercion.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the worst parts about having the coercive institutions and government present is when there are bad actors, if they're in bed with public officials, then they get the protection and they're seen as legitimate actors because the public officials are giving them their cover, and that's when you really have people's rights being run roughshod. So if you believe Bitcoin represents a free market, how do you justify that with China cracking down, Russia banning Bitcoin, the U.S. government treating it as property, the U.S. government putting... there's just the fact that there was no regulations created uncertainty, and banks were shutting down some businesses. They were refusing to do business with some exchanges. Like, it doesn't really sound like a free market. It sounds like the potential to have a free market, but the uncertainty kind of takes away from truly experiencing what that phenomenon would look like. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
did we miss the boat already?
We've missed it. I think we've already missed it. And I don't think it's unintentional. Excuse me. I don't think it's unintentional that we've missed it. I think governments have looked at it and said, we don't want free markets, and we do not want free exchange, and so we will interject ourselves in. And so, look, when the United States starts talking about the model that China is using to crack down on currency as, well, we should do this too because the Chinese are doing it. Really, maybe we should ban Google and Facebook as well. The idea that you're not going to allow for free exchange in China is nothing new, because they also don't allow free flow of information or any of that. In the United States, we're supposed to be different. Of course, we're not. We're exactly the same. I think there is an opportunity for pushback, but we have to push back now on this issue because, look, when you get guys like Senator Joe Manchin who are getting up and speaking about how Bitcoin is unstable, it's dangerous and disruptive, he says, it's volatile and it's used for illicit behavior. Well, every single one of those things is true of the U.S. dollar, the U.S. stock market. Yeah. It's true of our auto industry, our housing industry. So there's no question that all of those things are volatile. The difference is that government is able to control it, winners and losers. They don't control Bitcoin yet, and that's why they're frustrated with it.
That's right. Yeah, and if Senator Joe Manchin's worried about money laundering, you don't have to look any further than HSBC and Wells Fargo and the big banks.
Shut them down. If you want to ban
cartels.
Bitcoin, why don't you ban banking in the United States?
Yeah.
Because it's all a cartel.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting to watch Bitcoin from the get-go, in that it was unregulated, and it was kind of depressing to see it slowly but surely be regulated and entrepreneurs be shut down, or at least be paranoid to start up businesses in the States. But I think the great hope with Bitcoin lies, like you said, that relative to other currencies, it's a lot more difficult to investigate. It'll be a lot more difficult to shut down. What are your thoughts on people using Bitcoin not complying? Because, of course, the federal government, the IRS, put out these rulings that now Bitcoin's treated as property.
Right.
Do you think everyone that owns Bitcoin en masse is just going to willingly comply, or do you think Bitcoin presents an opportunity for more people to hide what they're doing from the man?
Well, I think civil disobedience is a used tactic that has great value to it. And I think that the people who use Bitcoin right now by nature are typically civilly disobedient people. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Look, if the IRS and our banking institutions think Bitcoin is a joke, why are you treating it as property?
Yeah.
You know, if I'm making mud patties and I'm passing them to you, does the IRS want a piece of that? Probably not. They're going to say, no, this guy's just sharing mud patties with people. And for a long time, they treated Bitcoin like it was a mud patty, right? It has no value at all. This is like play money. It's like joke money. Now that they see it has impact, now they want to tax it. And by the way, one other thing I'd say about that, you said it's unregulated. People talk about it being unregulated all the time. And I know the context in which you're using it. But I think there is a bit of a misnomer there. Because Bitcoin is not unregulated. It's just not, it wasn't regulated by government. right, or by banking institutions. It, however, is regulated in the free market by the consumer and the individual who's using it. So, for instance, like Mt. Gox. When Mt. Gox collapses, that's a great thing for Bitcoin because they're bad players in the market. And people got hurt? Yes, they absolutely did. 3 months before Mt. Gox shut down, I wrote an article. It's called Bitcoin is Soaring, but Beware Mt. Gox. Basically, I use my platform to say, I've been working with these guys, using the exchange. They're bad players. They don't respond to the consumer. They're holding money. I had other people complain to me. They've been holding their money 7-8 months. And I said, if you're involved in Mt. Gox, get out.
Get the hell out.
Well, after it collapsed, I had about a dozen people who emailed me and said, thanks for saying something, because I did pull my money out.
Nice.
I got out of there. That's regulating the market, right? When individuals work with each other. Now, I guarantee you this. If you have Bitcoin, and I know you do, you probably check your Bitcoin pretty often, as opposed to any money you might have sitting in Wells Fargo or Chase. You probably don't check on that every single day and see what the market's doing and what's happening with it. So I would say that self-regulating markets, the free market, that people are far more responsible as a whole in those markets because they feel less secure, when in fact the security we have with a government regulation is all faux security.
And it's crony security. Yeah, imagine if Mt. Gox if this was a government regulation paradigm, Mt. Gox being one of the larger exchanges, it could have been deemed too big to fail.
Absolutely.
And got a bailout.
It would have.
But instead it fails, and that's what happens in the free market. And there may be negative repercussions, but at least it doesn't create business cycles and create false information for entrepreneurs. It is what it is, and I think personal responsibility plays a big role with Bitcoin, and it also plays a big role with a free society as well. Before we let you go, tell me about your experience accepting Bitcoin as donations on your website, benswann.com.
Yeah, so when we first started accepting them, I actually didn't know anything about Bitcoin, and I had a couple of guys who worked with me out of New Hampshire who said, hey, have you thought about accepting Bitcoin? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So started doing some research on it, talked to Roger Ver about it, and he kind of gave me like a crash course. This is what Bitcoin is. Still didn't make much sense to me. But said, you know what, let's try. So we opened it up, and actually we were able to fund an entire episode last season just on Bitcoin.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was very exciting. Huge fan of it, and people can contribute. You know, we have the way to do that on benswann.com. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see where you can donate via Bitcoin. But listen, I'm all about it. I think the more opportunities we have for decentralized currencies, the better off we're going to be as a nation and better off as a people. And generationally, this is a winning idea. I mean, people over the age of 40 probably aren't going to be big Bitcoin buyers. People under the age of 30, probably much more so. So 20 years from now, where are we going to be with those kinds of currencies? I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's a guy I've been working on at the San Marcos Farmers Market, trying to get him to accept Bitcoin. He's curious about it. We always have conversations, but most recently he told me, I read an article in the Austin American Statesman, which is our mainstream newspaper.
Yes.
I said, you read that stuff? You take that seriously? And he said, any currency that I'm going to believe in has to be backed up by a legitimate institution. And I said, okay, well, and that's coming back to the same thing. Well, Bitcoin isn't for everyone, and thankfully no one's forced to use it.
It's voluntary, right? It is voluntary. To your friend, though, I would say, so give me one of those institutions. Which one's legitimate?
Yeah, there you go. U.S. dollar is your alternative?
Yeah.
Cool. So finally, give the listeners some information on where they could check out the projects you're working on and what's next for Ben Swann.
Absolutely. Well, you can go to benswann.com, and you'll see there we have a Truth and Media project. You can click on that and watch the videos. We also have stories that we're putting up. We have writers for our website putting up stories every single day. So we try to stay on top of stories really that deal with individual liberty. That's what we're really focused on, and holding government accountable. So you can find all that there. We also have a Roku channel. If you have Roku, just search for Truth and Media on Roku.
Ben Swann always has great stuff to say. Really appreciate the work he's doing. Be sure to check him out at benswann.com. It's always exciting for me, for people that have a big audience and that are, strong in their advocacy for liberty, to get on the Bitcoin bandwagon. I always talk about Jeffrey Tucker. He's always on the program. I'm so excited that he's into Bitcoin. So I think as more powerful, minds and advocates for liberty, justice, peace get on the Bitcoin bandwagon, I think it's only going to help grow adoption and expand the value of Bitcoin immensely. So it was great to chat with Ben Swann about that. Next, we're going to bring you a short little interview I did with Matthew Whittington. He's doing a lot of great work in the space of setting up a Bitcoin exchange. So I'm excited for one of those to be brought to Texas. There's not very many in the United States as a whole. I think at this point there's not one Bitcoin exchange in the States. I could be wrong, but he's definitely going to be bringing one here to the great state of Texas, and it's also going to be accepting altcoins. We chatted about his decision to include the altcoins, which is rare in the space of Bitcoin exchanges. This is an interview I did with Matthew Whittington about the Texas Bitcoin exchange he's setting up. Check it out. We're here with Matthew Whittington, and he is in the process of creating an online Bitcoin exchange in the great state of Texas. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Maybe you can just start by telling us how you got involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
I was first exposed to Bitcoin in early 2013, watched it, and like you, I ignored it for a few inopportune months. 2 or 3 months later, one of my friends traded me some silver for Bitcoin,
nice.
Which I sent over to Mt. Gox. In the 10 minutes it took to get there, it dropped from 110 to 55, so that was a little bit painful. And I traded on a few exchanges around the world and realized that half the time I didn't know where in the world these sites actually existed, so I looked for one inside the United States. At that time, there really weren't any. That was a need that I saw in the Bitcoin realm. The whole Bitcoin distributed technology, Bitcoin 2.0, is exciting stuff that I'm really looking forward to. I want to be part of it.
Awesome.
But if Bitcoin is going to have wider acceptance, adoption in this country, it's going to have to deal with the regulations. I just don't see another way around it. If my mom and your mom are going to be using it, they're going to want to be used to the same protections that they're used to in their day-to-day life. I'm certainly willing to use Bitcoin as it is. Not everyone is. I believe 3 or 4 years down the road, if even that far, we're going to see a lot of wild changes, introduction of the internet level, societal changes. These are exciting. Looking forward to it, looking to be part of it. To lean towards that, a Bitcoin exchange is really a single source of liquidity and capital. I've worked with a lot of these companies to offer any services that I can do to make these things happen.
Tell us about this Texas Bitcoin exchange you're talking about setting up.
When the exchange launches, we'll be supporting 7 digital currencies. It's strictly digital currency right now. At some point in the near future, we'll be applying for a money transmitter license in 47 states. Don't have to worry about it in the other 3. At that point, we will be using U.S. currency and any other currency. It's all the same to me, but the regulations differ. Massachusetts may be a while in adaptation because if I go internationally, their rules change. They're fine with me doing business until I go internationally, and then I fall into their money transmitter laws. If it comes to it, I'll choose Canada or Europe or something over Massachusetts. No offense, Massachusetts.
What's it been like having to jump through all the regulatory hurdles? What's that process been like? Has it been burdensome? Has it been overwhelming? What's that like?
It's not overwhelming. It's a lot of time on the phone, and it's usually not in a malicious manner. The banking departments, by whatever name in that state, may not know specifically about Bitcoin or how it applies, but it's not usually a we don't like Bitcoin sort of situation. It's we just don't know how to apply these rules, so we can't answer your questions. They've been civil about it, and talking to those banking departments, I haven't had any adversarial interactions with them. It's just a lot of bureaucratic paperwork and putting my name and I guess livelihood on the line as the go-to guy in the company.
Right on. Now, a lot of these Bitcoin exchanges are only exchanging Bitcoin, and a lot of people in the Bitcoin movement are not big fans of these alternative cryptocurrencies. What went into the decision to go ahead and include all of those alternatives within this exchange? I think it's pretty cool. What were your thoughts on that?
I've always been an altcoin supporter. If you have an exchange, you're obviously a supporter. But technologically, the altcoins offer things that Bitcoin doesn't have right now. And Bitcoin 2.0 may replace altcoins, and it may not. We'll see. The market will decide on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, you'll need a point of exchange between fiat currencies, whatever your local currency is, and Bitcoin, even if the altcoins do get replaced. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So we'll have plenty of time to cross that bridge when we come to it.
Right on. Finally, can you give us a place or how can people get more information about the work you're doing with this Texas Bitcoin Exchange? And what's it going to be called?
The exchange is called the Digital Currency Exchange of Texas. The website is www.dcxtx.com. One day in the distant future, or maybe not too distant, we may drop Texas from the name. The purpose of putting that there, I love Texas. I've been born and raised Texan. Isn't a Texas pride thing. It's to put it on the globe. So when you log into our site, you know you're not in Eastern Europe or Japan or China or Russia or wherever it may be. You know you're in a U.S. company under the same laws that you're living with day to day. If something does happen, lawyers and law enforcement know where to find us. You've got your protections there. Plus, the IRS doesn't necessarily like you holding assets outside the country. It's one less worry that you may have. If you're putting money on our exchange, you're not worried about hiding your money or sticking it under your mattress anyway. The IRS is going to be an issue. By the end of the year, definitely by April, we'll have some sort of reporting. So when you're doing your trading, you can get a PDF generated to have every transaction you've done, and maybe a short list of what numbers you may actually care about to make your taxes easier. Those are where we're going.
That's pretty exciting. We'll definitely keep you up to date as that project develops. It's going to be a Bitcoin exchange here in Texas. It's a pretty big deal, and kudos to him. I'm not a big fan of all the regulatory nonsense, so I'm glad that somebody's going through all the hard work of complying with the edicts and regulations. I know it's not easy, and somebody's got to do it, I guess. So kudos to him for putting all that together. I'm excited to see that exchange and use that exchange as soon as it rolls in to Texas. Now we're going to chat with Harlon Dietrich. He's the owner of Brave New Books. If you've been listening to the Sovereign BTC podcast from the get-go, you'll recall in the pilot episode we chatted with Ryan Dixon. He's a staffer there at the bookstore, and we had the opportunity to chat with Harlon. He's the owner. They've been around since 2006, I believe. It's the first brick and mortar to accept Bitcoin in the entire state of Texas, and they don't only accept Bitcoin, they're big Bitcoin proselytizers. Every time I walk down there, it's in a basement down on the heart of Austin, Texas, and the Drag, which is right there near University of Texas campus. Every time I walk down there, one of the people behind the register is talking to somebody about Bitcoin. And there's a lot of people that frequent Brave New Books that are skeptics. A lot of conspiracy theorists down there, so they're actually skeptical of Bitcoin. Some people think it's a global currency and a big giant conspiracy to get us under a one world currency. It's the mark of the beast. So there's a lot of hurdles he has to overcome, but Harlon Dietrich's always down there plugging away, turning people onto Bitcoin. He actually had some paper wallets with some millibits on them that he was offering here at the Texas Libertarian Party convention, and he sold all of them that he had, which is pretty exciting. So he's doing a good job of turning people onto Bitcoin and getting people excited about Bitcoin that weren't into it before. We chat with him about that. We chat with him about his business accepting Bitcoin and about cold storage paper wallets, which is something that he's really into as well. Here's that interview with Harlon Dietrich, owner of Brave New Books. What's the store all about?
The store was created in 2006. It's a store located a block away from one of the largest universities in the world, the University of Texas at Austin. I basically founded the store as a reaction to my education at that same university, where I felt my professors and peers were denigrating and marginalizing solid historical information that pointed to a sort of darker, more conspiratorial aspect of history that was being covered up by even so-called liberal, progressive-minded students and faculty at the University of Texas. So, 2 years after graduating, I came up with investors and the idea to put a bookstore, a sort of info space for libertarian and conspiratorial history and anarchist literature block away from the university. So that was the sort of philosophical sort of foundation of the bookstore. And we've been around for 8 years now, close to 8 years.
All right.
And we're doing our thing.
Right on. So being a proponent of the conspiratorial view of history, you're already an opponent of the Federal Reserve Bank. Is that something that played a role in you getting turned on to Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came to understand the Federal Reserve while in college studying history, and realized just a stupendous amount of misdirection when talking about history, as far as understanding the banking cartels and the whole history of this banking cartel. And that's, what led me to sort of embrace the idea of gold and silver and trading for barter economies, and then now more recently embracing Bitcoin. It was understanding, basically the banking, the history of the banking interests in our country and around the world that led me to sort of embrace alternative currencies.
Now, y'all were the first brick and mortar in the whole state of Texas to accept Bitcoin. Is that true?
I don't know if we're the first brick and mortar. We're the first brick and mortar in Austin to accept Bitcoin. I don't know.
Go ahead and declare it, Harlon. Unless someone steps up and claims it, go ahead and declare it.
18 months, about 18 months ago, I started accepting Bitcoin at the bookstore. I will say we are the first brick and mortar bookstore in the world.
Nice.
To accept Bitcoin. I don't think that's been rivaled.
Claim it. You heard it here on SovereignBTC.
That's right. So
that means it's fact.
That's right. Believe it. Print.
So were y'all using BitPay from the get-go? Tell us about your point of sale. How do you incorporate Bitcoin into your business?
Yeah, we use Bitcoin in the beginning. BitPay in the beginning to do our transactions. I was a little worried about the price of Bitcoin and its fluctuations, so I wanted to be able to have the ability to convert it to back to FRNs, back to the dollar, and so BitPay was a clear choice for that. But I more and more recently have become, in the past 6 to 8 months, have become really interested in just keeping Bitcoin as a commodity itself, and using it as something that I can keep my savings in for the bookstore, and as a hedge against the possible destruction of the dollar and its purchasing price and its instability there. And the amount of growth that can happen in the Bitcoin space, I felt like we should just keep it ourselves. So I sort of cut BitPay. I just sort of took BitPay out of the equation and started accepting it in my own wallets. So people can basically trade books for Bitcoins to me, and it'll go in the bookstore wallet. And yeah, it's been great so far. I think we've probably done 6.5 Bitcoin worth of business.
All right.
Since we've been accepting it.
So is that nerve-wracking, holding in Bitcoin, watching the price go up and down like a roller coaster?
It is a little nerve-wracking, but once you get to understand Bitcoin, the technology that underpins Bitcoin, you realize how impressive it is and how valuable it will be to the world. And any fluctuations, you just kind of like... you just put it out there that people that are throwing a lot of money into the Bitcoin space don't really understand it. I think there's a lot of speculation going on. But as soon as the world gets to know Bitcoin for what it is and what it represents, I think institutional investors are going to look into it not just as a speculative commodity, but as something that is a technology that is going to be huge. And they're going to see it as a real value to buy in even at these prices.
Excellent.
So.
Now, you're big into paper wallets and cold storage. Tell us, for listeners that aren't familiar, what is cold storage and why do you think it's a valuable thing to look into?
So cold storage is the idea of basically removing your Bitcoins from any online presence or even on your hard drive on a computer. That's called a warm wallet, basically, is when you have it off the internet, but on a computer that may have touched the internet or be connected to the internet. It's still slightly vulnerable to any sort of hacking anybody who wants to hack your computer or so on. So you want to completely remove that risk. You have to take it completely off any computer that may have been connected to the internet or is connected to the internet. So that's the idea of going cold. And cold storage is typically done on a paper wallet. So the idea is you can print out a public and private key, and you can store your Bitcoins on that public and private key that you've printed out. And you can even encrypt paper wallets now with BIP38 encryption, so that even if somebody were to get their hands on your physical wallet, they would still need your passphrase to be able to spend those Bitcoins.
Excellent.
So it's at this moment in time, it's one of the safest ways to store your Bitcoin, because you can be your own bank. You don't have to trust a third party, which Bitcoin is sort of the unofficial catchphrase of Bitcoin. Be your own bank. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to trust anybody. You don't have to trust even your computer. You can trust the fact that it's on a piece of paper, that you know where it is, you've hid it, you've stored it somewhere secure, and you can have peace of mind. So
it'll help keep the government's grubby hands off your Bitcoin too, huh?
Well, true. Yeah, I mean the government. There's a reason why. The criminals and drug dealers and so forth, they use cash, right? It's because it's away from the prying eyes of the government, and that's what Bitcoin is. It's digital cash. So if you're going to go digital with digital cash, you want to put it on something that they can't ever get their hands on, and paper wallets are the way to do that. So free from the grubby hands.
That's for drug dealers, criminals, and people that just don't want their property to be stolen from the government.
That's right.
Cool. All right, before we let you go, tell people where they can learn more about Brave New Books, and if they're in the Austin area, they can come visit. Where's that at?
They can look for us on bravenewbookstore.com, and they can visit us at 1904 Guadalupe. We're a block away from the university. Come down. We got some Bitcoin information there for everybody, Bitcoin materials. We have Bitcoin paper wallets there, so you can actually buy one of these paper wallets that we've encrypted and that we've pulled off the internet on a computer that's never touched the internet.
Cool.
So it's a real safe way to start your Bitcoin. And they're actually preloaded with a little bit of Bitcoin, just so you can tell your friends and family, I own Bitcoin.
Nice.
And so we got those available for you. And we even have some Bitcoin miners going in the back, so you can watch Bitcoin being pulled out of the digital mountains, the digital universe, and panning for Bitcoin ourselves.
Right.
So come and visit us, bravenewbookstore.com, or come down to 1904 Guadalupe in Austin, Texas.
Thanks, Harlon.
Thank you.
Harlon Dietrich's a good friend of mine. Again, I'm so excited that he is into Bitcoin and spreading the word and really turning a lot of people on. You can check out more at bravenewbookstore.com. Finally, folks, to close down the show, we're going to present to you this panel that took place. It was called Bitcoin, Banks, and Bailouts. It featured Ben Swann as the moderator, myself, Michael Cargill of Central Texas Gunworks, Dr. Louis Rentschler was on the panel as well. Audience seemed to really appreciate it. Everyone was way into it. A lot of people came up to me afterwards and thanked me for spreading the word on Bitcoin. One guy even walked up and said he's been on the fence for a while. Now he's going to go out and buy some Bitcoin. So that's really what it's all about, and that's why I do my work, to encourage people to take responsibility and take control of their value and their wealth, and that's the great promise that Bitcoin presents. Got the opportunity to chat with people about Bitcoin 2.0, which is always exciting. A lot of people don't know that currency is only the first application for the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin technology, so I was excited to get that word out as well. I think the panel went great. I want to give a big thanks to the Texas Libertarian Party, who had a big announcement at the end of the panel. I'll save it for your listening pleasure, but it's a big surprise. It's some big news coming out of the Texas Libertarian Party, so appreciate the work they're doing, and I want to thank them for inviting me to speak about Bitcoin at this event. So without further ado, folks, here's our featured panel. We do featured interviews, we do featured speeches. Now we have a featured panel for you. It's called Bitcoin, Banks, and Bailouts, and I hope you enjoy it.
Tell us the name again.
Universidad Francisco Marroquín.
Very cool stuff. All right, also, John Bush. Where are you at, John? You in here? Just sneaked up on me. He's like a cat, so stealthy. Did you eat yet?
Yeah, I ate.
All right, good. John, tell us a little bit about yourself, as if they need an introduction from you.
My name is John Bush. I've been an activist for about a decade for the cause of liberty and helped to found Texans for Accountable Government. We recently started the Center for Natural Living. It's a 501c3. The mission is to demonstrate the value of voluntary cooperation and natural living, and also doing a reality-based program called Sovereign Living. It follows my family and I in our quest to become self-sufficient and lead a voluntary natural life. And essentially the philosophy of sovereign living is the idea that we should not rely or depend on centralized or coercive institutions in order to solve our common problems or fulfill our wants and needs. And so the panel is all about Bitcoin. Bitcoin came natural because I think it's a wonderful demonstration of the idea that we don't need to rely on a centralized or coercive institution in order to exchange value. So I'm super stoked about Bitcoin and started a weekly podcast called SovereignBTC. It's also a media marketing and consulting firm, and excited to be here at the Texas Libertarian Party convention. Give it up for peace and freedom!
Yeah!
All right, we got Michael Cargill, who did not sneak up on me. You came up the way I could see you here. Why don't you introduce yourself, Michael?
All right, my name is Michael Cargill, owner of Central Texas Gunworks. We're a gun store in Austin, Texas.
Woo!
Yes, we specialize in training and also small concealed carry pieces. And I guess one thing about me, I'm I'm the owner of the gun store, and the reason I started my gun store is it's mainly to protect women in their individual rights, because I don't think women should actually have a man to have to protect themselves. I think women should be able to protect themselves on their own. And if you're that person that feels that you look different, you feel different, maybe people look at you different, think that you're some different person. Well, let me give you a little help there. I'm Michael Cargill, the black gay gun store owner.
And make sure he's not behind me. Mick Truitt, are you in here? Where are you at, Mick? Is he with us? All right. Well, I suppose Mick slept in too late. That's all right. Maybe he came to our little party at the Hilton. He's like, I don't even know what day it is. It's all good. If Mick shows up, then we'll allow him to come up here. All right, so the panel we're going to talk about today, Bitcoin, banks, and bailouts. How many of you in this room have Bitcoin of some kind? Litecoin, altcoin. Okay. Good, so not many of you. In comparison, I think. That wasn't even half the room, right? Did I see that correctly? All right, well, what we're going to try to do is convert all of you today, at least on some level, even if it does not mean obtaining Bitcoin, to talk about the value of it, whether or not there's, actual real intrinsic value to it, or whether or not there's value in terms of disruption that it creates in the market. So we'll talk about all those things. Panel, let's talk a little bit about the beginning process. Can you share, well, first of all, let me ask the panel, how many of you guys have Bitcoin of the three of you? All three of you do? Okay, good. So tell me about the first kind of step into Bitcoin that you took. How did you encounter Bitcoin, and why did you begin either accepting or using Bitcoin? We can start with you, Michael.
I actually started accepting Bitcoin mainly because of Brave New Books. A lot of the employees from Brave New Books, Harlon, raise your hand, please. Raise your hand with food in your hands. There you go. Mainly because a lot of the employees there, continued to ask me, why don't you accept Bitcoin for firearms? And I really didn't know what it was. Yeah. So I did my little research for the last year, and I decided, I'll start doing it on the personal side. And then after a little while, I started doing it on the business side. And what I did was I actually used a merchant services company to actually accept the Bitcoin. And then they actually paid me in the cash because I did not want to put my company any type of any financial risk or any problems with the IRS because I didn't know what they were going to impose later on down the road. Mm-hmm. So on the business side, that's how we do it.
I first heard about Bitcoin a couple years ago, but didn't really think much of it. And then I guess probably about a year ago, a good friend of ours, Ethan Lee Vita, he's an agorist, somebody that believes in revolutionary market anarchism and not participating within coercive systems. He was leaning on my wife, Catherine, and I for a while to set up a wallet and to start using Bitcoin and mining Litecoin, actually. But we were so busy, I kept telling Cat, hold on, I'll set it up once I learn a little bit more about it. And that never really happened until more recently. But finally, we got set up with a Bitcoin wallet at Brave New Books, actually, with a good friend, Michael Goldstein, who has Bitstein Consulting. And I was really excited about it initially for the promise that it has to disrupt the status quo. Again, being a proponent of sovereign living, the idea that we shouldn't rely on centralized or coercive institutions to lead our daily lives. I thought that Bitcoin is a wonderful example to demonstrate this and to inspire people and to have a living example, proof that we can exchange value, we can do something on a massive global scale without having any government involved whatsoever. So that's originally why I was so passionate about it. Then I actually started using it. I run the Liberty Beat along with Justin Armand and Jessica back there. It's a daily news service. Raise your hand if you heard of the Liberty Beat. 90.1 in Austin. All right, yeah. And I started paying people that I'm working with Bitcoin. This guy named Derek Brose, he's an agorist in Houston. He likes to do things off book and stay away from the government ire. Sorry to blow your cover, Derek. No, he's public about it and proud of it. And I was paying him, and originally I was mailing him FRNs in like Christmas cards through the mail, which is kind of risky.
And then I tried Western Union a couple times. It was like 6% fee. It was a pain in the behind. I had to drive out to HEB. And then I thought, why the heck don't I just use Bitcoin to pay him? He lives in Houston. I could give this a try. So I encouraged him to set up a Bitcoin wallet. And now I'm able to send him the value instantly without any government intervention, without any credit cards, without any fees. It gets sent over to him like that, and he immediately transfers it and sells it to someone using a service called Local Bitcoin. So I was originally turned on to Bitcoin for its promise to disrupt the status quo, and then I really became a true believer once I actually started using it and found out the genuine practical value. And that's why I'm very bullish on Bitcoin and think once more people realize how easy it is to use, how magnificent it is as a technology, I think it's going to go through the moon. So get your Bitcoin now. Get to the left side of the decimal point while you still can.
So I actually first heard about Bitcoin when a visiting professor came down to Guatemala, and he was renting a room from one of our other professors and asked if she wanted to be paid in dollars, quetzales, or Bitcoin. So I did some reading, joined a mining pool for Litecoin for a bit, and started bringing this up in classes, discussing things with students.
The Bitcoin's an interesting thing because like you guys, I've only recently really came to understand what it was, and people were telling me, hey, you guys ought to accept Bitcoin as we created content, and we started our own project, which was a crowdsourced project, and there were people who said, well, why not Bitcoin? And I didn't know much about it either. It is an interesting thing. When you first encounter Bitcoin, it seems so strange. It's so different than any of the basic archetypes that we have when it comes to currency, when it comes to finance, when it comes to centralized monetary policy. And yet you do realize that we live in a time, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we live in a time in human history where centralized banking is not that's not an historical precedent for anything, right? This is a fairly unique phenomenon in terms of human history, to have the centralized control over trade and money supply the way that we do today. And so, but you also have to step back and realize that in the last 100 years, there's no American alive today, maybe there's one or two, but probably no American alive today who really remembers a time when we did not have a central bank. And so there is this idea of the security that comes through so-called banking institutions. Now, we all know that's nonsense, right? Because we've seen what's happened to the economy. We know what's happened with the banking collapses, the auto industry, the housing industry, the bailouts, and all those things that have taken place. So, panel, let me ask you this: when talking about Bitcoin to people, how do you overcome the discussion, or what are your feelings on the discussion about a quote unquote decentralized currency versus the institutions of banking, and whether one is safer than the other?
I kind of have to show them through my actions, because some of the problems that I found, as soon as I announced to the world the fact that we're going to start accepting Bitcoin at Central Texas Gun Works, which is a gun store, I received, I know exactly, oh my God, the gun store. Well, I received messages through Facebook and phone calls from attorneys around the country saying, look, people are getting arrested for this. You're a gun store. You're heavily regulated. You're going to wind up in jail. It's the worst. It was the sky was falling. They just wouldn't quit. They continued to call over and over again and send me messages. Well, I was determined. For one, yes, I'm in a heavily regulated business where the FBI and the ATF can walk into my shop, walk into my house at any moment and just, look at anything, all my records. But we're doing everything right. And this is no different than accepting cash. It's no different than accepting a credit card. You're going to pay me by credit card. You're going to pay me by cash. I'm still going to do the exact same thing. We're going to have you fill out the paperwork. We're going to call the FBI and all that stuff there. So in a sense like that, it really is not a problem for me, because we're going to do everything right. And I just, want to show them through my actions, this is what we're going to do. We're going to accept the Bitcoin. We're going to continue to do business like we do. And we're not going to skip a beat in following all the regulations that I need to follow.
Okay.
I've spent the past 5 years heavily trying to convince people that we don't need to rely on government for anything, and that voluntary interaction can
fulfill our common wants and needs more efficiently, equitably, justly, more freely, more safely than using coercive means. And I think government is a wonderful tool to demonstrate that. I'm sorry, Bitcoin's a wonderful tool to demonstrate that. Freudian slip there. I'm actually a Democrat, progressive. I've been fooling you all for years. And so I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of people about Bitcoin. We do a farmer's market down in San Marcos, Texas, on the town square on San Antonio Street. Come see us every Saturday from 9 to 12. We'll sell you some T-shirts and cool, fun stuff. And we accept Bitcoin, and we have flyers out, and we strike up a lot of conversations with some of the other vendors, too. And there's this one vendor. He's an older gentleman that has a pretty successful farmer's market stand. They sell a lot of vegetables from their garden. And we've been having a conversation about Bitcoin every week, and he talks about what's going on in the news. And more recently he said, I saw an article in the Austin American-Statesman. I said, you still read that garbage? Take it seriously? And he said, it's all about the volatility, and Bitcoin, it's not backed by anything. And I said, well, that's the beauty of it. It's not backed by a central bank. It's not backed by a government. And he said, well, I would prefer my currency to be backed by a legitimate institution. And that really struck something in my mind. And I think there's a lot of folks, especially in previous generations, that don't necessarily understand the true nature of this peer-to-peer decentralized concept, this new phenomenon, really. Actually, it's really timeless. There's been decentralized peer-to-peer institutions since the beginning of civilization. Now they're just more in your face, and we know more about them through the internet. But I think there's a lot of people that aren't going to... Bitcoin isn't for them. The technology is somewhat difficult to understand, and thankfully there's a lot of innovation that's taking place in the market of Bitcoin and making it easier to use and more user-friendly. But I think there's a lot of people in this world that are never going to let go of the idea that in order to feel safe and secure in my business dealings or in my daily life, I need a central, legitimate institution to help me through that. And you know what? That's okay. There are no legal tender laws with Bitcoin. Not everyone is forced to use it. But I do think there are some promises. And again, it presents the opportunity to demonstrate to these people and to show someone that anarchism does work. Bitcoin is a working, living example of anarchy in action across the globe. People aren't forced to participate in it. People exchange value in a mutually beneficial manner. And I think it's a wonderful tool to not only educate people about the value of Bitcoin, but to tie it to the greater push to create a free society, to show that here we have an institution of money and value exchange, that we don't need this government or big banks in order to do that. Maybe we could do that same thing with healthcare or justice or food production or even defense. Maybe we can do peer-to-peer decentralized institutions for defense, whether it's a militia. Give it up for what happened to the Bundy Ranch, right? That's a decentralized peer-to-peer example of people coming together voluntarily for mutual benefit. And I think that can be expanded, it can be replicated. And so I think in order to overcome that with some people, the classic old adage, if you've been an advocate for liberty, some people are a little hard-headed and some people don't want to be into liberty. Some people want to have a government watching over them, and that's okay. Give it your all, and if you realize that they're not going to come around, then move on to the next person, because there's plenty of other people that are interested. And I think as younger people come into positions of power and become entrepreneurs or take positions in government, hopefully they don't take positions in government and create the alternatives, but I think it's going to become more and more understandable that this decentralized way of doing things is actually more equitable, more efficient, more just, and a better way to do things. It's more effective. It gets the job done in a better way, and it weeds out corruption. And I think those are some great talking points to share with people in order to turn them on to Bitcoin and freedom.
In my experience, where people have the hardest time wrapping their minds around Bitcoin is that it's not a physical good, and also additionally it's not backed by any formal institution, any centralized institution. So they have a really hard time understanding why that could hold any value or be useful. That's actually one of the potential assets, if it were to actually become successful, is its decentralized nature. So there's no possibility of inflation tax if it were to become that successful. And unfortunately, I think that probably this is part of the reason why Bitcoin will struggle a bit, is that it actually is a challenge to sort of established institutions. And so the Fed, and if Bitcoin were to become successful enough, it actually would make it less possible for the Fed to enact monetary policy as it saw fit. It's a check on their discretionary power. And as such, they're going to have an incentive, of course, to limit its success. Now, whether or not they're able to do that, I mean, certainly they won't be able to make it go away, but will they be able to, put a check on its success such that it doesn't actually become a viable substitute for the dollar? My suspicion is probably that's the case.
So this idea of unregulated, Senator Joe Manchin came out a couple weeks ago railing against Bitcoin, wants to ban Bitcoin. It's dangerous, disruptive to the market, he says, that it's used for illicit behavior, as if dollars are not used for illicit behavior, right? But gives this whole explanation of like all the reasons why Bitcoin is dangerous. Now, I would contend, and I would argue, that there is a misnomer when people say that Bitcoin is not regulated. Okay, I think Bitcoin is regulated. It's not regulated by government forces or by a centralized bank. But I think, in my opinion, Bitcoin is the one great example of free market capitalism in the world today, right? Because I think so. I think you have people who are able to, number one, be part of a voluntary exchange. And number two, it does regulate itself. There is regulation in the Bitcoin market that comes in the form of consumers and people interacting with each other in this system. And so I want to talk to the panel about this because there is a misnomer that it's just the Wild West and there's no control and anything terrible can happen to you, right? When we talk about free markets, right, the fear is that in the free markets, if you talk to a libertarian, they'll tell you it's all awesome, right? And it's like, no, it's not all awesome. Free markets have tons of terrible things in them. Bad players, people who are scammers, and people get hurt in the free market. They get hurt in all markets, right? It's not just the free market. But, so it's not all sunshine and lollipops, but at the same time, there is a response. So you get like a big company in exchange, like a Mt. Gox that collapses. In my opinion, that's a good thing that they collapse because it clears the market of a bad player. They were a bad player in the Bitcoin world. So to the panel, I would ask this. What do you guys see happening as we move forward with Bitcoin in terms of the market regulating itself? I mean, there are a host of new exchanges that have popped up since Mt. Gox collapsed, where people are coming in saying, we'll have more transparency. We'll demonstrate to the market that we are better players. What do you see happening in terms of that?
First, to Senator Joe Manchin, who wants to ban Bitcoin. There's a gentleman that bought one of our shirts. If you wouldn't mind standing up there, Sean. It says, "Come and take Bit," and it has the classic Gonzalez flag. So, Senator Manchin, you want to take our Bitcoin? Come and take Bit. I'll have trouble getting my private keys. Yeah, I think the beauty of Bitcoin is that it's a grand experiment, and it's the closest thing we have to demonstrating a genuinely free market. Unfortunately, there are governments that have already tried to ban it. There's the taxing it as property now. Again, come and take a bit. And there's also all sorts of FinCEN, the U.S. Department of Treasury is doing money transmission regulation, all sorts of nonsense like that. But in reality, the best regulation that exists is the personal responsibility that comes with those users of Bitcoin. And of course, there was a lot of media that came out. People were saying, "Oh, I heard," people walk up to you about Bitcoin on Facebook and stuff like, "I thought Bitcoin went bankrupt." Or Bitcoin failed, and it's like, no, not Bitcoin is a network. That's the same thing as saying, if Gmail all of a sudden went away, like, would we have email still? Of course we would. So if Mt. Gox fails, we still have Bitcoin. There's still other exchanges. And some of these other exchanges have voluntarily audited themselves, which I think is exciting. It's a wonderful business practice. For those who are not familiar with Mt. Gox, that was one of the largest Bitcoin exchanges early on. They actually started off trading Magic the Gathering cards. That's Magic the Gathering online exchange is where you get Mt. Gox. And they had some really poor business practices. Apparently they were hacked and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin were stolen. They tried to cover it up in order to maintain the integrity of Bitcoin, and then that turned into a cascading effect, and they went bottom up. But a lot of people recommend that you don't hold your Bitcoin in these exchanges. You don't hold them in institutions that are controlled by others. You take responsibility for your Bitcoin, putting them in cold storage or using paper wallets, which Harlon Dietrich could tell you about at Brave New Books. You put them in wallets that are stored on your hard drive and encrypted rather than giving other people the power and authority over your value and your wealth. Now what's taking place, there's actually a peer-to-peer decentralized Bitcoin exchange that's coming onto the market through the Mastercoin protocol, which is really exciting. So Bitcoin is showing through institutions, it's referred to as Bitcoin 2.0.
Currency is only the first application of the Bitcoin network, of the blockchain technology, which is the big public ledger where all the Bitcoin transactions are displayed. There's going to be smart contracts. There's going to be voluntary associations that come through this. There's even a decentralized rideshare program that uses the blockchain and GPS technology in order to link people up that are traveling to the same destination or the same area, which is really exciting because the city of Austin just shut down a centralized app that was being created because the city council is controlled by the taxi cartel. Yes, there's a cartel for taxis. Get your medallion, leave us alone. It's like the mafia. It's crazy stuff. But the beauty of this blockchain technology when it's decentralized is you can't shut down this peer-to-peer rideshare program. There's no way to shut it down. There's no CEO. There's no asset. So I'm excited about the promise that this blockchain and decentralized application has. And yes, it is. There's more risk involved. There's no FDIC. Not that that means anything anyway these days. So I think it presents a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate the value of people taking personal responsibility, and I'm excited about the entrepreneurial innovation that's taking place in the market that can give people more of a sense of security with Bitcoin, because you're not going to be able to go to the government and tell them that, hey, somebody robbed my Bitcoin, I need help. Wouldn't recommend doing that anyway. It's incumbent on people using Bitcoin to take it upon themselves to secure their coins, and there's a whole slew of options out there, but yeah, I think it is definitely dangerous, and people should be wary if you are going to be using and exchanging Bitcoin, but there's wonderful opportunities where you don't have to put your coins or you don't have to rely on even centralized Bitcoin institutions, and I think really that's the promise of the future.
So moving forward in terms of regulation, I think probably one of the biggest issues is going to be another one of the big assets of Bitcoin, which is that anonymous exchange. And I mean, certainly we've seen in the past year just how much effort, particularly the US government, is willing to go through to make sure that we don't have anonymity. And so the fact that Bitcoin is largely anonymous, I mean, of course, all transactions are publicly observable through the blockchain, but the fact that we have that anonymity is something the government is going to have and we'll have a big problem with, I think. And I think it's actually fairly easy to imagine a scenario in which, right, so Bitcoin transactions are linked to some sort of terrorist act or something with child pornography or something with money laundering or drug trafficking. And I mean, I don't think there's that many politicians who are willing to stand up and say, no, we don't want to put, high regulations which will dramatically increase transaction costs on this, right? As soon as they're able to link that, I think, regulations will become strong enough that transaction costs will be sufficiently high that, of course you can't make Bitcoin go away. It's totally decentralized. But it'll relegate it to more of a niche market. And as a result, I mean, the true promise of becoming big enough and an actual competitor for currencies and fiat money and so forth, I don't think will materialize precisely for this reason.
What you're going to hear is what you heard before. The banks are too big to fail. I say let them fail. Let them fail. What I started working on was I'm working with a lot of distributors here around the country, some of your major gun distributors. And down the road, I expect that these firearm manufacturers are actually going to start using Bitcoin. And the more major companies that we start getting involved in with Bitcoin, the stronger that is going to be. Your smaller businesses, start accepting Bitcoin. If you start a business, accept Bitcoin, accept cryptocurrency, because let those banking systems, those banks that are too big to fail, let them fail. Let them go. Remember the internet? When the internet first came out, guess what happened? Banks started doing business online on the internet. You had a bank actually lose millions of dollars by doing online banking. Things are going to happen. We're going to run into these mistakes as we grow and get educated on Bitcoin. So let the bank go. Let mommy and daddy go.
One of the realities of people who fall back on this idea of the centralized banking system as a protection for currency. Number one, they're obviously not paying very close attention to the conditions of those banking institutions, which are not sound by any means. But the beauty of the free market, when we talk about Bitcoin, again, for those of you, is everyone here familiar that Mt. Gox had collapsed? Were you familiar with that beforehand? You knew about that? Okay. Because, it's important to understand that if Mt. Gox had been regulated by the federal government and in the Bitcoin world would have been deemed too big to fail, because people will be hurt and they'll lose their money. And people were hurt, and they did lose their money. People were hurt by the failures of the guys running Mt. Gox to uphold their contractual obligation with the consumer. So people were injured by that, and there was hurt as a result of it. That does not mean, though, that the answer to that hurt is to institute government into it to prevent hurt from happening, right? But had Mt. Gox been propped up, and it would have been, it was too big to fail, had it been propped up, then we would be forced to have this massive Bitcoin exchange that was insolvent, bad players, propped up by taxpayer money so that they can continue to provide poor service and continue to do a poor job of running their exchange. So the positive side of a failure like Mt. Gox, and there is positive to failure, is that when it collapses, it sheds the market of one player who should not be there. And it creates innovation and opportunity. It creates innovation and it creates opportunity for the entrepreneur. If I came along in 2009 and said, I have a better banking system, am I allowed to institute that? Absolutely not. I can't do that. Remember during the debates in 2012 when Mitt Romney was asked about the guy who was doing the ice cream? You guys remember this? An ice cream parlor? Remember? And he had an ice cream parlor, and people would come to him, and he was operating as a bank. You give me money, I'll hold your money for you, and I'll give you coupons in exchange for ice cream, and people would come back. Well, this guy got shut down because they said he was operating like a bank because he was exchanging ice cream notes, right, in order to hold people's money for them, right? And Mitt Romney was talking about, he was asked about banking in one of the debates, and he said, well, you just can't have rogue bankers out there setting up banks in their garages, right? Why not? If my neighbor has a nice garage and says, hey, Swanee, I'll hold your money for you, and I go to him and give him my money and say, you hold it for me, and we'll have this, again, voluntary exchange, and I ultimately lose my money because all of a sudden now my neighbor's got a really nice car, right? His window shades got a whole lot better, and then he comes to me and says, oh man, some bad news. I lost all your money. No, you didn't lose my money. You stole my money, right? But if I choose to be a part of that voluntary situation, that voluntary exchange, then I'm putting, yes, myself at risk, but am I entitled to take that risk? I think when we talk about Bitcoin, that's what we were seeing, is this growing group of people who are saying, I want to be part of a voluntary exchange system. Again, no one's got a gun to your head saying you will participate in Bitcoin. No one's doing that to you. So it's a voluntary exchange system in which people, operate this way. According to the government, up until recently, we were basically passing mud patties to each other, right? There's no value to this. Bitcoin's, it's like child's money, right? It's monopoly money. So if I made a mud patty, and I passed the mud patty over here to John, and I said, I want to give this to you in exchange for that glass of ice that you have left. And he gives me the glass of ice. Is the IRS going to tax that exchange? No. They're not going to do that until you get a few million people passing mud patties, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait a minute. We need our share of the mud patties because that's clearly currency. So the IRS has now come along and decided they will now tax the exchange, right, of Bitcoin. Talk to me a little bit about where you think that leaves Bitcoin. Does that take the fire out of its belly? Does that rob it of momentum to have the IRS now coming along and saying, we want to be a part of this? Fake money?
Couple points on Mt. Gox. There's actually a Bitcoin 2.0 system called Gox Coin where people are putting value into Gox Coin and they'll get paid out if people get their Bitcoins back from Mt. Gox through legal action. So there's an innovative solution where people are trying to make these folks that lost money through Mt. Gox whole. And then you brought up a good point, Satoshi Nakamoto, the secret creator of Bitcoin or creators of Bitcoin, he didn't ask permission before he put the open source protocol out there to the world. A lot of people, that's what banking institutions, we have this new technological way of banking, we better go and make sure it's okay with the regulators. He just put it out there, and now the cat's out of the bag, and there's no putting it back, no matter how hard governments try, which is really exciting for the prospects for liberty. I think the IRS is a corrupt, fraudulent institution, and I think anything we could do to undermine it is extremely valuable for the cause of liberty. I think there's a lot of people that are excited in the Bitcoin world about the IRS's ruling that Bitcoin is property and that it's taxable and that you even have to have an income tax on the mining of Bitcoin, which is the creation of Bitcoin by verifying the transactions that take place through the Bitcoin network. That's what mining is. And I think people are excited about that because they believe it brings legitimacy to Bitcoin. There's a lot of wealthy investors and financial capital and legacy money in the Bitcoin ecosystem that's excited about regulation. And there's a rift forming within the movement. There's rifts in every movement. Texas LP, Republican Party, Bitcoin Network. And in this movement, you see people that want it to be unregulated, that want the true anarchist potential of Bitcoin to come to full fruition. And you see people that want to make money off of Bitcoin and use it and incorporate it into the legacy banking institution. And I think that the IRS recognizing it as property brings more legitimacy to it in the eyes of those type of actors. And I think for those that want to use Bitcoin as a means of essentially replacing the status quo system, there's some downsides to that. I think it's strange to sit back and watch the Reddit forums and people in the Bitcoin world go into their tax accountants, and everyone's just hurriedly rushing to figure out how are we going to claim this Bitcoin? How are we going to claim this Bitcoin? And how do I report it? And what do I do about deductions for my mining equipment losing value and so on and so forth? And it's kind of depressing that so many people in the Bitcoin world are just going to pony up and report everything. But on the flip side, I think the great promise of Bitcoin relative to other mediums of exchange is relatively, it's uninvestigatable. And if you did it right, you could, in fact, hide your wealth and your value from the federal government. And I think if we truly want to create the free society that we all desire, it's up to each and every one of us to start taking proactive steps to do just that. To stop funding our own oppression, to stop participating in the financing of foreign wars of aggression, murder, genocide, and slaughtering of innocent people. And I think that's why Bitcoin is absolutely amazing, because people do have a choice. The IRS may say you don't have a choice, even though they refer to it as voluntary compliance. And there's no liability clause. And income isn't an exchange of value for, wages isn't income. Income is a gain on a corporate gain, so to speak. But I think there's the great promise that people now have the choice. If you want to make money, if you want to earn some income on the side, and you want to do it in Bitcoin, and you want to keep it on a cold storage paper wallet that never sets foot on the internet, you have the choice to do that. And you now have the choice to keep your wealth and your value out of the hands of the IRS. It may be risky and put you at more risk, but if enough people do it, to hell with the IRS, and to hell with the income tax, and to hell with anybody that thinks they have a right to your property.
In fairness, John, I just want to say the IRS also says that we are customers. So they need better customer service. So, yeah, it's more than just voluntary. We're the customers. So,
yeah. So treating Bitcoin as property, of course, has a lot of tax implications. I mean, every transaction is now a taxable event. There's concerns about, fungibility of Bitcoin if it's property, not currency. Of course, one way around this is to say, okay, it's pretty hard to track. So just don't report anything. And certainly at these earlier stages, probably you'll get away with it. It's probably pretty feasible. But as it becomes more successful, I think that'll be less true. I mean, we already see a lot of these exchanges going through a lot of steps to make sure there's compliance with know your customer laws. And these will only increase. So is it possible to just totally stay off the radar? Yes. Of course, if you get caught, there's, serious implications for that, unfortunately. So my takeaway from the IRS ruling is essentially that, technologically we can get around this. In terms of determining what our tax liability is and making sure we're in compliance. That's possible, but it does again raise transaction fees a little bit. And this increase in transaction fees just makes it harder and harder, or less and less of a alternative.
Good. Let me ask, Michael, to John's point, as a business owner, does it bring more legitimacy to Bitcoin, do you think, because the IRS is now involved? Because there's, one of the questions that you said early on, people calling you up saying, oh, well, you got to watch out because you're going to end up in jail, and this is like a criminal currency that people are asking you to use. But now that the IRS is involved in it, so you have the criminal cartel of the IRS now involved in the criminal currency, how are you, as a business owner, do you feel better about accepting Bitcoin because of the fact that there is at least some understanding of it as having this taxable value?
From the way that we do it right now, there's no change whatsoever from the way I do business. On the personal side, I'm not going to tell you what I do on my personal side, my personal Bitcoin. But on the business side, what I do is a person will pay me in Bitcoin, and it goes to a merchant services company, and I get the cash. So I do it as a cash sale. So regardless of what the IRS says, it's a cash sale to me, and I treat that as cash. So if a person pays me in the state of Texas, then I pay the sales tax to the comptroller so, they can get theirs. So Texas gets their cut, and then that's how we do our transactions. So
as a business, you're never actually handling Bitcoin as a business?
Correct, because I use a merchant services company.
Oh, okay, got it. Well, that makes sense. Okay, so long term, so somebody's sitting there and they say, I got into Bitcoin, let's say you jumped in around, $700, right? It was up to $1,200. You said, oh, this thing's going crazy. And then it dropped down to $700. Like, I want a piece of this. And now it's down to like $450. And you're like, should have waited. Where do you see Bitcoin going over the next 12, 16 months? And I don't want you to necessarily be a prophet and give me a number like, oh, it's going to be worth $20,000. But just give me an idea of where you think it's heading. Is there going to continue to be so much volatility, or as we get more adoption, and hopefully more adoption of it, do you see that price beginning to stabilize somewhat?
I'll tell you real quick what I do. We have a CoinVault ATM where we can purchase Bitcoin right there in our shop. So you can walk into the lobby of the shop and actually purchase Bitcoin. So every day I walk into the shop and I take a look at that price. And then on the personal side, I may go in and purchase some Bitcoin. I'm not going to tell you. And then possibly, maybe. And I watched that price. I loved it a couple days ago. It actually dropped down to $300 and something. So it was all about buy. And then that's how I handle on the personal side. I'm going to let John take it from here.
Yeah, there you go. That's good stuff.
Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen, because Bitcoin is going to the moon. I'd like to hope. It's either going to the moon or it's going to pennies, where it started. But either way, here's the beauty. Here's what I like to tell people. The actual price or value of one Bitcoin, in large part, is irrelevant unless you're trying to use it as an investment tool in order to earn a higher gain on your investment. Because if I want to transfer, again, back to my example with my buddy Derek Bros, if I want to pay him $160 for his service that he does with the Liberty Beat, we'll say $100 to make it easier, and Bitcoin is worth $10, I simply go purchase Bitcoin from Michael Cargill's ATM or from an exchange or from localbitcoins.com. If Bitcoin's worth $10, I'll buy 10 Bitcoins. I'll then send those 10 Bitcoins to Derek Bros, and he could sell them for his native currency, FRNs, or he could keep it. Maybe he could get his landlord to accept Bitcoin. That'd be awesome. If Bitcoin is $1,000 and I want to send him $100 worth of value, I would simply purchase a tenth of a Bitcoin. So for the tool of a medium of exchange, a value transfer system, it doesn't matter what the price is. Bitcoin can still do exactly what Bitcoin claims to do, which is transfer money worldwide without being dependent on a centralized institution for little to no fee, which is, I think that's the main value of Bitcoin. So ultimately, I do believe that the price is irrelevant for that particular purpose. The reason why I think Bitcoin's going to the moon, and you should strap yourself in and get yourself some now while you still can get it to the left of the decimal point, is what I meant. Like, when Bitcoin's worth $100,000, it's going to be hard for everyone to get to the left of the decimal point and to have a whole Bitcoin. You'll have half a Bitcoin, be like, yeah, or even, a millibit, which is 0.0001 Bitcoin, or a Satoshi, which is 8 zeros in front of the one. 7 zeros in front of the one. The reason why I think it's going through the moon is because of Bitcoin 2.0, the alternate applications for Bitcoin besides currency. There's a difference between Bitcoin with a capital B and Bitcoin with a lowercase b. Bitcoin with the lowercase b
refers to the unit of value that's transferred along with the Bitcoin ecosystem. So if you hold 6 Bitcoins, you're talking about, I have 6 Bitcoins with a lowercase b. Bitcoin with a capital B, an uppercase B, is referring to the Bitcoin network as a whole. And the heart of that network is the blockchain, which is this public ledger technology, which is where the true innovation lies. This piece of technology can be used to set up smart contracts, to utilize escrow. Let's say the Libertarian Party wanted to raise money with the... Y'all did a fundraiser last night and raised a good $13,000, $14,000. Good job on that front. If you wanted to use the blockchain as a tool for fundraising, you could have, okay, well, everybody's going to chip in however much you want, and it's going to go to an escrow account. And this money is going to be programmed. There's going to be code to pay to the contractor that's going to provide the service you're trying to get. But it's only going to pay out once we reach a certain amount of money. You could use smart escrow accounts like that. You could even use Bitcoin for your voting. I love Vote Rescue. I've been following for several years. It'd be great to try and experiment perhaps at the next convention using the Bitcoin blockchain in order to make votes. So essentially when everybody registers for their Libertarian Party membership, you can assign them a Bitcoin address. They can have, and then you can also send them a Satoshi or a millibit, a tenth or 001 of a Bitcoin, 0.001. And then when it comes time to vote, they can send that particular Satoshi or the millibit to the particular candidate that they have. Everybody only gets one vote. You can even code it to where you can only have one of these millibits. You can even create a token on one of these Bitcoin 2.0 applications like the Mastercoin protocol. It could be called the Libertarian Party coin, or whatever. And you could use this as a means of voting. I referred to the decentralized rideshare program earlier. I have a great idea where people can actually create a voluntary association. We can replace government as a means of providing for our goods and services. Say, for example, we all wanted to create our own voluntary network. I call them freedom cells. We're trying to do this from the ground up, right? We all form, each table is its own little group, and we all unite into one meta group as a whole. And what we want to do is we want to provide health care for one another. So let's say Johnny over here, he breaks his leg, he's in an accident. We don't want to rely on Obamacare or centralized healthcare insurance institutions. So what we do is we say, you know what, everybody go ahead and donate to this particular account. It's the Johnny's Broken Leg Fund, and whenever we reach a certain amount of money, it'll pay out to so-and-so. Likewise, you could do it for community defense. We could all say, we're going to continuously chip into this account, and whenever we have enough money, we're going to hire a private defense agency to protect us from private and public aggressors alike. So I think there's a bunch of wonderful, promising uses of the Bitcoin blockchain. It's called Bitcoin 2.0, and I think you can even do stock exchanges through the blockchain. I think once people genuinely realize the potential that the Bitcoin blockchain has to innovate every different industry out there, that's when I think we're really going to experience very high prices of Bitcoin, upwards of 10,000, 100,000, and through the moon, because it has the opportunity to replace the legacy banking system and do it much better in a transparent, decentralized way, without inflation, without cronyism, and I'm super excited about it. And I strongly recommend you should get into Bitcoin now, get to the left of the decimal point while you still can. That's the theme.
So in terms of what I would expect to happen in terms of pricing, certainly we're seeing a lot of volatility right now, and so I don't think it's forecastable. I have no idea which direction it's going to go. In terms of what determinants what this would look like, I think regulation will play a big role here. How heavily is it regulated? Will have a big determining factor in its price. Also, just how quickly do we see adoption? It sounds as if Amazon is toying with the idea. If we have a lot of these sort of big retailers start accepting Bitcoin, if it gets more public acceptance, we might start seeing a lot more stability, and we might see prices go up. Or if sort of before that happens, we see some pretty strong bills pass, then prices would go down pretty dramatically. Which is going to happen, and it's impossible to say.
Good. All right. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions out there? Yep.
I'm going to repeat the question. I'm actually recording this for my podcast. You can find it at SovereignBTC.com. So I'm going to repeat the question that's asked. Unless we have a microphone for the floor, he asked, a lot of people attack Bitcoin saying that it has no intrinsic value. How do you respond to that? I like to believe that the value of the Bitcoin network lies in the decentralized peer-to-peer fashion. There's two ways that the value lies, actually. The value lies, for me, in the fact that you can trade value over the entire globe instantly for little to no fee. That has intrinsic value for me. And of course, if you subscribe to the Austrian theory of economics, the Austrian school, you know that there's subjective value. So nothing can, in my opinion, nothing can really have intrinsic value. Like a piece of gold, if you're starving, it has no value. What are you going to do? You're not going to eat the gold. If there's no one to trade food with for the gold, then the gold really has no value to you. Maybe it's shiny and it looks good. So I believe it's entirely subjective. So I believe that Bitcoin has value because you can trade value like that, and it has the relative anonymity. But I think the true value lies in the technology. The Bitcoin network is said to be the most powerful supercomputer in the entire world, up to 4,000 more powerful than NSA's most powerful computer. That's where the value lies. There's millions and millions of dollars that are in this mining equipment, the nodes that make up the decentralized peer-to-peer Bitcoin network. So for someone to say that Bitcoin has zero value, I would challenge them on that. I would challenge them to take a look at the infrastructure that's been developed over the past 5 years, take a look at the institutions that are using this network, and take a look at the real value that lies in this network. And as I said before, I think we haven't even begun to experience the value of Bitcoin and the potential it has to change our world. Free the markets, free the world.
That's good.
I have a couple miners. There's a couple miners at Brave New Books if you want to see what they look like and how they work. There's just people, you were originally able to do it on your computer, on your CPU. So anybody that had a laptop was able to mine Bitcoin and verify the transactions on the Bitcoin network. There's a lot of people that are beginning to use it now. It went from CPUs to graphics cards, and now there's ASICs that are computer chips that are specifically designed to do the algorithms that are related to Bitcoin. So I don't know what the number of people that operate these nodes, but it's easily in the hundreds of thousands or more, and it's decentralized completely. It's being funded by people like you and me that have these rigs in their basement. You know, even if their wife doesn't like it, they're mining Bitcoins. It's making a lot of noise, generating a lot of heat. I'd like to set mine up at the apartment, but Catherine won't let me. I think the kids could knock it over or something. But I think the banks could try to shut it down, but they're not going to be able to. And that's the new paradigm. And that's what I would hope we can all break free of. The idea that, oh, well, since the government said this, then we better obey. Like, it's time to stop obeying, to disobey. That's where the value in our fight is. Stop obeying. And so let's say they try to shut it down. There's going to be people that have the Bitcoin miners in the back of a truck with a shipping container. They're driving it around. It's like Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction that he drives around and is not to encourage that or anything, but I think that there's a very strong spirit of defiance alive with Bitcoin. So the government can say whatever the hell they want. The banks can try, but the cat's out of the bag. It's a decentralized, peer-to-peer, open-source technology, and there's nothing you could do to shut it down. Go ahead and try.
And before you answer that real quick, just to clarify, though, I think that where it became confusing for you is when he used the term supercomputer. You're talking about the network, the blockchain network. It's not a central computer system, hardware. And that's where it became confusing.
The combined computing power of the Bitcoin decentralized peer-to-peer network, which is a series of nodes all across the entire globe. Maybe they'll shoot some up into satellites in no time. That computer power combined is the supercomputer I'm referring to. And you can't shut it down. Like in Fight Club.
Because it's not centralized.
That's right. In Fight Club, they blow up all the banks and the computer towers at the end, right? Not advocating that, of course. But you can't do that to Bitcoin. You could shut down supercomputers that Wells Fargo operates and that Goldman Sachs operates, but you can't shut down the Bitcoin network. You'd have to come to my house and try to my office. Undisclosed location.
Yeah, so I mean, as a quick point, I mean, when you're mining Bitcoin, I mean, basically you're loaning your computing power to the Bitcoin network, and your compensation for that is you are awarded Bitcoin for doing so. So this is the mining process, is loaning your computing power to that. Actually, it's an interesting example of this idea of you should expect profits to go down to zero if there's free entry, anybody can enter. I think it's a great example of this I use in class because basically, you're weighing the cost of the electricity of your computing power and, of course, your hardware, against the rate of what Bitcoins are awarded to you. And at this point, it's pretty much zero. I mean, of course, you can jump ahead and get better technology, but the value of mining Bitcoin is pretty close to zero.
The mining actually does two things. In addition to creating money, new Bitcoins into the market, which it started off creating 50 Bitcoins for every block that's created. And there's 2,016 blocks that are created, and they try to do it at an average of 10 minutes. And every time 2016 blocks, that's the collection of all the transactions that gets added to the blockchain and approved by the consensus process of miners. Every 2016 blocks, the Bitcoin software, the open source code, recalculates the difficulty of how much computing power it takes to mine these Bitcoins. And then every 4 years it halves it from 50 to 25. And this actually gives you a consistent, you know what to expect, unlike a lot of the stuff with the legacy banking institutions and the creation of money. But the mining actually does two things. In addition to creating this money and rewarding the miners for lending their computing power to the Bitcoin network, it also verifies the transactions that are taking place on the Bitcoin network. So in a sense, it does both. It allows for the money exchanges and allows for the creation of new money by creating an incentive for people to lend that power. And it's really amazing how it does it. Every time you send a Bitcoin, we sold one of our shirts at this event for Bitcoin. That transaction is then shot out to the Bitcoin network, and the Bitcoin miners all go through and break complex algorithms to ensure that this is actually a genuine transaction. And they actually go through the entire blockchain to verify that this particular wallet address has the number of Bitcoins in it to complete the exchange. It verifies the inputs to that wallet, that it received enough Bitcoin, and it verifies that it has not outputted that amount of Bitcoin to make it happen. So I think the security compared to putting the FRNs in underneath your mattress is that somebody could physically come in and take the FRNs, and somebody could put a gun to your head and say, tell me where the FRNs are, or they could raid through your house and rummage through your stuff and actually get the FRNs. Whereas with cold storage, if you could even get rid of your paper wallet. There could be no paper wallet, and you could memorize your private key. So you'll have ultimate power over that, whether or not. And that's why governments are shaking in their boots. Like, they want you to claim if you travel with over $10,000 internationally, you could travel with your private key in your head with millions and millions of dollars, and you could show up in another country, in Taiwan, for example, and you could output that private key and exchange it for the native currency there, which is really exciting. So I'm not going to say, I was going to say, well, the dollars underneath your mattress, those are, they can be affected by inflation, because the price is so volatile. You keep your stuff in cold storage, and you could lose an immense amount of value, which is why it's important to really balance that if you're trying to have this as an investment. But
okay, I think we're almost out of time. We're going to do one more question, and then you guys can catch these folks afterwards. Go ahead.
Right now, you have the option to add a mining fee onto your transaction. And it's a good idea if you're sending a large amount of wealth through the Bitcoin network to add a 0.005 Bitcoin or 0.05 Bitcoin if it's a lot. That gives the miners an incentive to include your transaction within the current block. So after all of the Bitcoins have been awarded, sometime in like 2150 is when that's slated to happen, somewhere in 2100, the incentive for miners to continue to engage in the process of verifying transactions will be the mining fees. I imagine as that time gets closer, the fees will naturally increase because the miners can choose to not participate unless they're incentivized. So I imagine there'll be a nice free market mechanism that determines
part of the free market. Okay, very quickly, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to announce that my campaign for Lieutenant Governor will probably be the first statewide campaign in Texas that accepts Bitcoin.
There you go. Outstanding. It's a big selling point. All right, Pat, come on up. Would you guys thank our panel? Lucas, John, and Michael, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Ben. It's been great having him last night at the dinner and moderating this, and to thank the panelists. The Libertarian Party Robert sort of stole my thunder a little bit, but I'll say it anyway. The Libertarian Party of Texas is the first political party in the state of Texas to accept Bitcoin. Now, I'm not going to do right now what Michael Cloud did last night. I'm just prefacing this. But if you say, wow, that's great, I'm going to go on the website and donate Bitcoin, it's not there yet. It works. Michael Cargill actually helped us test it, and yesterday Justin Armand met with me for breakfast at 7 o'clock to solve a technical issue. It works. It's just not on the website yet. But I'm out of a job now. So Kurt, this is a softball. Actually, it's easy. So for Kurt and the state committee and staff, you can put it on the website at the appropriate time, but it works, and I'm very proud to announce that. So be looking for that. And now Jeff Neal wants to say a word. Without objection.
First time you haven't objected to me speaking. I just want to announce one thing. The National Libertarian Party has been accepting Bitcoin on its website since June of last year. Thank you.
You're all dismissed. Form a single file line and just walk out the door.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Texas Libertarian Party is now accepting Bitcoin. How exciting. They're the first political party in the state of Texas to accept Bitcoin. Who knows? Maybe the Republican Party and Democratic Party will follow suit. Only time will tell. But I really appreciated being here. Got to talk with a lot of great people about Bitcoin and meet a lot of good people. Bitcoin is alive and well in the state of Texas. Bitcoin is alive and well in the liberty movement, and Bitcoin is alive and well across the world. So this is John Bush signing out for the Sovereign BTC podcast. Check us out at SovereignBTC.com. You can find the podcast on LRN.FM. That's the Liberty Radio Network and their podcast feed, or you can hear us on Let's Talk Bitcoin Network. Check it out at letstalkbitcoin.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com, and follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/SovBTC. And as always, I want to remind you, use Bitcoin, live free, and prosper.